Hello there, fellow glue sniffers and sprue snippers. Welcome back to Blitzkrieg Model Works. I'm Darklin, Bob. You know me as Darklin on the forums. Welcome back. I finally got some time to do all the body work, and I've got some of the painting done on our Italeri Leopard 2. As you can see, the turret is done with the exception of the MG3 machine gun. On the loader's hatch, everything else is painted. All the seams were buried pretty well, other than that monster on the bottom, which we won't really see anyway, but you can see how tough that was to fill in. No matter what I did, that seam kept popping open. I've got like a 2mm chunk of plastic in there with super glue and Tamiya extra thin and MEK and everything I could put on it to keep it there, and it just keeps popping open and popping open. So it's going to get hidden. It's good enough. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do the lower, and I've already masked our areas that we painted and done some of the snow weathering on. We've taken care of, let's see if you can see the areas around the sponson storage. So we'll see how well those turn out. They look pretty smooth without any paint. So I am going to shoot some Tamiya XF67 NATO green. Now normally Tamiya is it's a water-based acrylic, so you can use I can't quite reach it, but I keep some in a little lab container. This is Tamiya Thinner or Tamiya, depending on what accent you want on what syllable, or I don't know if you can read that. This is like 99% isopropyl alcohol. I found for mixing it's like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It doesn't matter. Now, Tactical Jackalope kind of turned me on to a little technique because the Tamiya paints tend to be a little on the fragile side when you paint them. So he actually turned me on to Lacquer Thinner. Now he uses Tamiya brand Lacquer Thinner. And me being the cheap old modeler that I am, I'm going to spend the same amount of money and get a big can of this stuff. This is like a 1 liter, I guess it's a pint in the States. But I decant it into smaller Tamiya bottles. And from the sounds of it, you mix it pretty much the same half and half mix is what I usually do. Some seems to work better for some people. It kind of depends on your airbrush setup. Now, you don't necessarily need an airbrush to do this. There's a lot of different techniques. If you could do this with a brush, you're probably not watching this, especially if you can do this with a brush. The guys that can do that, believe me, it is phenomenal what some of the guys that dedicate themselves to brush painting can do. I've seen some phenomenal work. But for the rest of us mere mortals, it's almost impossible to do anything close to this. You can do this with a spray paint. There's a couple of different techniques. Some people will use like cotton balls or polyester batten, and you can kind of glue it on with white glue and paint, and it kind of gives you the hazed look, and then you peel it off and do other patterns or glue more on. I've seen people use thin or heavyweight paper, like manila envelope type paper, file folder, and cut that out and like stand it up 1/4 inch or so and spray directly over top, and the paint kind of goes underneath a little bit to get this as well. I've even seen some people use like blue tack or sticky tack or something and get something similar to this. It's usually a bit cleaner, but you can certainly do that. What we're going to do here is normally I run a Pash VL airbrush. This does not have the needle installed, and I use a fine tip nozzle. The needles are all the same size, it's the nozzles that change, and this is a dual action siphon feed. So what happens with this is when you pull back, that controls how much paint comes through. When you push down, that controls how much air comes through. So you can control the amount of paint with the size of the nozzle, how far back you pull the needle, and how much air you give it. But for this, I'm going to try something rather new, because the VL's a rather expensive airbrush for a beginner. And if you really want to start, I picked this up. This is basically a copy a Chinese copy of an Iwata airbrush. I would really like to get an Iwata airbrush, but they do tend to be fairly expensive. I picked this up for like $30–40 at Princess Auto here in Canada. That's kind of our version of Harbor Freight. In Eastern Canada, I think they have something called Tractor Supply. I don't know how far east Princess Auto goes. And this is what I used to shoot this. And I was actually rather impressed. It did need a little bit of prep work, and there's a few tutorials online about how to clean things up and polish the needles and all of that. I seem to be fairly fortunate. Mine was pretty good to go out of the box, other than the needle that is actually in there. You can kind of see it in here. It's a 0.3 mil needle, I believe. That's what they claim on the box. The needle was kind of hooked on the end, so I kind of straightened it out on a sheet of glass, and then used some very fine sandpaper on the glass to kind of roll the needle around while I sanded and got it nice and pointy. And I actually did a rather nice job, all things considered. And I know that you can get these things like way cheaper in the States on Amazon, and you know, I've even seen them for like something similar for like $10 on eBay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'm not going to show you me painting this because it's going to be rather boring. It's just going to be the green to start with. That's going to be our base color, is the green. But then I'll come back after that's all done and set, and then I'm going to show you how to match up the camouflage in the turret to so the camouflage on the hull matches when the turret is facing the same direction. Okay, so we'll be back in 2 shakes, and we'll see you in a minute. And we're back. As you can see, we have a nice even coat of Tamiya NATO green on everything, and you can see how well the putting went. Not quite so well on this side. There's going to be a little bit of work I need to do yet, but pretty minor. But otherwise, it looks actually really nice. So how do we get this camo pattern to match up with a blank slate on this side? Easy. First, we assemble the halves. There we go. And we get this on as straight as you can. And then it's quite a matter of using a pencil. So we know that the black is here to here. And we'll mark it with BL to indicate that it's black. Brown is here, BR. And you just keep going all the way around. BL. And there. BR for brown. And a little. Now, in this case, I wasn't really looking at following the approved NATO pattern, just kind of getting more of a feel for what it would look like. L, BR, BL. Now this is to give the illusion that when it's above, it just kind of flows out. Let's go over here to about here. Get underneath there a little bit. And there. And that's all there is to it. If from there you want to do masking, if you're doing it, no problem. If you want to do free form, which is I'm going to do, I have actual photos of NATO vehicles. You can find them all over the internet, no problem. This was the what they gave you in the kit, the temporary camouflage pattern, which is actually the approved NATO pattern. Well, actually, it's not even the approved NATO pattern. It was changed. They give you a left and a right hand side, front and back, and a top. I didn't really follow that. It was more of a basic guideline. But from there, now I'm going to take the camera down and reset it up at my spray booth, and I'll show you a little bit about my setup and my rig and how I do my airbrushing. And we'll start with the brown. You always tend to, or you try to start with the lighter colors or the largest color, in this case the green, and then you go with the darker color. So we'll go with the brown next and then the black. Okay, so we'll see you all in a few minutes. Hi guys. Okay, so now this is a quick show and tell of my spray area. I understand not everybody has the luxury of having a spray booth. It took me many years to be able to get to the point where I do have a spray booth. And I just built one myself, really cheap. I saw a picture of one on the internet one day, and I thought, well, that's really simple. So all it really is, it is just a plastic storage tote that I picked up at Walmart. There is a 4-inch dryer vent, a 90-degree angle vent with a duct, I suppose I should show you, with a duct that goes up to a Squirrel Cage Fan. Sorry, I keep hitting the tripod here. Goes to a Squirrel Cage Fan, and it has a simple on-off switch. Once it's going, it's actually pretty quiet. It just has a little air intake filter to keep particulates out. I just changed it for the show. It's just held on by some Velcro. It's white Velcro, so you can't really see it, but it's there. And then I duct it out through, I'm in the basement, I duct it out through a dryer vent that I've fitted to a piece of hardboard that just literally Velcros into the window. I take the screen out, it's got a quick release screen, and I Velcro it right in, and it's a nice August day, last day of August, doing this today. So that's how I got that set up. And for painting, this is the cheap Princess Auto spray gun. I've got it apart for cleaning right now. Oops, I forgot to clean it the last time. And Lacquer Thinner really makes the paint glue together really well. So I'll be using the Pash for this one, which fell down. So that's my little Pash VL that I'll be using. And for air supply, I've got a small, just a Canadian Tire Mastercraft compressor. I'm sure you guys in the States can get something similar from Harbor Freight. It's about a 3-gallon tank. It is noisy as heck, hence the hearing protection that I keep on top of my spray booth. And I have it plumbed into a 10-gallon air tank or air pig. So I can fill both tanks and then shut it off, and I've got it rigged so I can valve it on and off in all different ways. I can actually disassemble and take the tank out if I need to fill up a vehicle or bikes or whatnot, and that works fine. And then off the tank it comes up through an air trap, through my pressure regulator, and then out through the hose to either the VL or it's teed off and it goes directly to the cheap Chinese gun. So that's my simple setup. I understand not everybody has something like this. But one thing I cannot stress enough is if you're going to airbrush or use spray paint, paint in a well-ventilated area. Believe me, until I got this thing set up, wow, was it nasty in here. I literally have an old surplus gas mask that I would wear, and after a good couple of hours of painting, I mean, my eyes were burning. I would get out and I would go, just wash my hands, even though they were, they look clean. It would just be gray, with a tint of whatever paint I was spraying. It was pretty nasty. So please spray in a well-ventilated area. Spray away from pets and kids, and try and keep your neighbors and your spouses and significant others happy. So I'm going to rearrange the camera a little bit, mix up some paint, and we'll get to spraying. Okay, we're back. So we're going to start with brown, and I am using Tamiya XF68 NATO brown. I have mixed it about half and half in my paint cup with isopropyl alcohol. I use 100%. I get an industrial supplier, but you can go to a cosmetics place. They'll usually sell it there for makeup remover or for first aid use. You can stir it in the pot if you like. A technique that I like to use, and you got to be a little careful with it, is you can plug the end of your airbrush and very gently pull back, not a lot of air, and it back flushes the air through, and you can use the air to mix your paint for you. Some airbrushes have a cap, which makes this a little less messy. My paint bubbles a little bit because I put a little bit of soap in it. Run that a little bit longer. That should be good enough. Now, whenever you're starting one color to the next, oops, sorry, I got the tripod like right beside me. Sorry if I keep bumping it. Excuse my reach here. Never spray directly on the model with the first shot. You always want to spray like on a piece of paper or some plastic card or the inside of a box or whatever. Or you can do what I've done over the years. I have what I call my Paint Hulk. This is an old Tamiya T62 from way back in the 80s that I partially built, never finished, and just gave up on it for whatever reason. So every once in a while I'll just do what I did here. I just gave it a shot of some gray automotive primer, and you can use that to test your airbrushing. So you can test to make sure that your pressure's good, that your pattern's good, that everything's mixing well. Got some paint sitting at the bottom here. Let's get rid of that real quick. That looks better. That's a nice pattern. Now, like I said before, this is a double action internal mix. So it mixes the paint in here in the nozzle before it comes out. And when you push down, that gives you your air. So nothing comes out. Drawing back opens up your needle, as you can see in the back. So you can go from almost nothing to very little to wide open. You'd only do like wide open. You'd want to do it at a fairly good distance, not like I was making a mess here, but at a fairly good distance, and light passes like so to do like a base coat, right? Oops, splatter. Do small little bits like that. Now, the paint that I've used, I've mixed about half and half, like I said. Some guys like to mix it a little thinner, some like to mix it a little thicker. I know some guys even mix it with, instead of using Tamiya thinner or isopropyl alcohol, I've even seen some guys use lacquer thinner, which is what I did here, but I'm going to be using the isopropyl for this. Now, this is a Tamiya paint stand. It swivels really nicely. I just used it as a stand someplace to put this where it's up and out of the way, but because we're going to be spraying on the top, I'm actually just going to be manhandling it, and I don't really have a pattern in mind per se. I'm just going to kind of freewheel it. Now we've got our marks. I don't know how well you guys can see those. That shows up fairly well under the light. Yes, I got a fluorescent light bolted to the top of this. So we have our marks where our brown is going to be and where our black is going to be. So for our brown, let's see, we have one here. And, oops, excuse my head. Dirt, forgot to open the valve to the air tank. So I was running off of whatever was in the line. We're just basically going to do some markers. Brown, 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 brown. So here, here. Brown there. So those are all of our markers. So we just connect the marks so we know where we're going to be filling in. Now on the back here, you notice there's a whole whack of nothing here. We got to kind of figure out where we want to paint from there because the turret bustle, the back end of the turret, was hanging over this point. Now, this is where a very delicate touch comes into play, and this is where an airbrush really shines over a spray can. Now you can do a pattern like this with a spray can using usually like a masking putty, and spraying from a distance away, and say only doing the top and then only doing the side, and making sure the masking putty isn't sitting like right flat but actually has a bit of a rounded edge to it, so when you paint it, the paint comes and it'll actually come slightly underneath, and you get that slightly phased look that you get with an airbrush. Don't use something like a masking tape. You won't get the right type of tape edge for this type of pattern if you're doing something like the Swedish hard edge geometric camo. Definitely, but that's really difficult to do, especially over all the tools and the like. But we can go very, very lightly. You don't have to go paint the whole thing all at once. Just kind of figure out, okay, when I want some paint here. Don't be afraid to loop it around. Like I said, I'm not following an exact NATO pattern or anything. Over the edges a bit. And back. Squeeze it in a little bit. And make sure that, because we got all the tools in place, you want to make sure that you spray very lightly. Like I said, you can do multiple coats. Here, down the side. You can wear gloves if you like. Some guys do, especially if you're using lacquers, enamels, etc. Or if you're using a very fragile paint, like you're using like Alclad stuff, the metallic paints. Those are, you don't want to be handling that with your bare hands. They're very fragile. Some guys say that Tamiya paint is quite fragile. I haven't personally found that. I find it actually to be a pretty robust paint. Take your time. Don't worry about being exacting or 100% accurate unless you're, especially if you're just building for yourself. It's another thing if you're building for, a high-end competition too, because you get guys that will look at your work and go, oh, well, that's not the right pattern, that was never used, or it might be similar to the right pattern but not for the markings that you were using, stuff like that. So now it doesn't look like too much right now, but it'll certainly look a lot different once we get the black on. So you have to spray from multiple angles. Another trick that you can do if you don't mind the extra time is you can put a sealing coat of like a lacquer in between each color, especially if you're using Tamiya, because these are acrylics, so they are alcohol/water base. If you screw up and you don't like it, I would have to strip this entire kit and redo it, potentially if the paint was on thick enough. If you used like a lacquer dull coat finish, satin finish in between each coat, then you could easily strip off one coat without affecting the other. And then once the camo's on, then there's some detail painting that has to be done. Some of it you can do before weathering, some of it you should do after weathering, like for example the periscopes for the driver. There's 4, there's one here, and 2 on the hatch. You'd probably want to paint those after you've done all the other weathering, because they would tend to want to keep those fairly clean. Although if you're going to, you know, display it like just going through a mud puddle, it's definitely not going to be clean. So keep that in mind, that it's got to look the part for whatever that you're painting on. Heavy there. And voila, that's all there is to it. It may look very simple, but realistically it is. It's not rocket science. Having something like, you know, an old paint hulk or something you can hammer stuff out on and see what works for you, what doesn't, before you actually hit your live kit. Highly recommended. I mean, you can get kits in the bargain. I mean, it doesn't even matter what it is. I mean, if you don't like, excuse me, if you're a car modeler and you don't like tanks, you can use a tank. If you're a sci-fi modeler and you don't like tanks, you can use a tank or a car or an aircraft or whatever. I mean, just pick something up cheap, something, maybe something somebody gives to you, or something that you won in a door prize or something that you never want to build. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, just make sure it's not going to be a kit. Like, to me, this kit really wasn't worth building at the time, so it got designated as paint hulk. And that's it. So I'll come back, I'll do a little slideshow at the end and show you. I'll fill this in a little bit more. It's kind of light in a few spots. We'll wait for this to dry. I'll shoot the black, and I'll do a shot of it like this. Then I'll do a shot with the black, and show you all the different steps through the coating, then the decal application. It's all very simple. It can be done with a slideshow very easily. Okay, so thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next chapter.